Hi everyone, Oliver from Data Academy here. Welcome to this video about functions. A function is a block of code which will run when it is called, and we can also pass data into a function, and these are called parameters. These parameters can be manipulated, and then finally we can return a value. So let's create our very first function. This first function is not going to take any parameters. To define it, first we're going to write def for define, and let's call this my first function. We're going to put some brackets. Usually we put our parameters in here, but since we don't have parameters, we don't need to fill it out at this point. And then we're going to put a colon. Everything after is going to need to be indented to show that it is part of this function. And all we're going to do in my first function is just print executing my first func. And let's just call my first function to do that. You're just going to want to type the name of the function and then put a pair of parentheses after to show that you're calling a function. And now let's run our code. It's going to say executing my first func. Next, let's take a look at a function that will take one parameter. We will call this one add5. And the one parameter it's going to take is going to be called num for number. And we are going to say print num plus 5. When we call our function, I want to add 5 to 1. This should give us 6. Now let's run our code and see. It indeed does give us 6, and we are also still calling my first func, which is why I printed executing my first func. Something interesting is that you can actually call a function within the body of another function. So let's do it this way and delete that. When we call add5, it should first print executing my first func, and then it should print 6. Or if we change this to 5, it should print executing my first func and then 10. And just as expected, that's what our output was. So now let's keep the my first func call within the add5 function, and let's create a new one which takes two parameters. This one is going to be called multiply, and we are going to take two numbers, number 1 and number 2, and then what we're going to do is print the product of these two numbers. So now when we call multiply, and let's say we want to multiply 4 and 5, this should be giving us 20. So now let's check it out. And now perfect, it's giving us executing my first func and 10. That's from when we called add5. And then we're multiplying 4 and 5, which is giving us 20. It's behaving exactly as we expected. You may be familiar with the concept of a composite function. It could look something like this. F of g of x, which means g of x, the value of g of x is going to be the parameter for f. And we can also implement this in Python. And let's say we wanted to multiply two numbers and then add 5 to that number and then print it out. So how would we do this? We would be using composite functions. So we can do this by chaining multiple functions together, but there's one thing that we need to do first. Instead of printing these answers, we are going to want to use something called return. And return is similar to print, but think of it like this. When you print something, you are outputting a visual representation of it to the user of the program. And the user will be able to look at what it has outputted, what it has computed. However, the computer doesn't really make use of this value. But if you use return, it's going to return it to the next function in line. So this will become a little more clear when we implement this. Let's say we wanted to multiply 3 and 4 and then add 5 to that. We know 3 times 4 is 12, and 12 plus 5 is 17. So let's write out the code for that. And then we're going to put add 5 to the outside. And then finally we're going to put print again. Remember, print is a function too. So now let's see what this is going to give us. 17 just as expected, and also it says executing my first func because when we execute add5, it's going to also run my first func right here on line 9. So let me go on my whiteboard and explain this even further. In our Python editor, this is the line of code that we had, print add 5, multiply 3 and 4. So now let's take these into bite-sized chunks. First, we're going to take a look at this little bit, multiply 3 and 4. We'll put it over here. And when we multiply 3 and 4, let's say we're running this function just on its own. All it's going to do is do 3 times 4, and we know that that equals 12. And when we write print, it's just going to print out 12. If we had our shell here, then 12 would appear right here. But this really does not provide much value to the computer at all. So that's why we're using return. When we return it, it does not show up on the shell. So this is gone. However, it's going to put 12 in the place of multiply 3, 4, and then it's going to be the parameter of add 5. So now this is what it turns this entire line into. We're going to rewrite the line. Print add 5, and then instead of multiply 3, 4, because we know that these are all equal, these are all the same, it's just going to turn to this. And now add 5 just has the parameter 12. And now, once again, let's break down this even further. Add 5 to 12. We know that this is equal to 12 plus 5. We know this is equal to 17. Once again, if we were going to print it, it would just show up in our shell like this, 17, but we're not printing it, we're returning it. And when we return it, it's going to turn into this, print 17. This sets add 5, this to the same value as this, which is 17, and then it just gives it as a parameter to the next higher function. And print is a function, so that's why when we print it out, 17 will appear on our shell. So I hope this explanation made things a little more clear. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.